While the researchers were analyzing that set of photographs, an unexpected document emerged from a regional archive that had remained closed for decades. It was internal correspondence between two government departments. The paper was aged, part of the ink had faded over time, and several sections were illegible. Still, one sentence remained perfectly clear. The cartographic update must be executed immediately. The location in question shall no longer appear in future publications. No names were mentioned. No justification accompanied the order, just a direct instruction to remove that location from official maps. The discovery raised an uncomfortable hypothesis. Perhaps the city's disappearance had never been an accident. Perhaps someone had actually made the conscious decision to erase its existence. But why? In modern history, governments have altered maps for various reasons. Secret military bases were hidden during armed conflicts. Research facilities temporarily disappeared from charts. Strategic regions had their names changed for political reasons. However, in those cases, parallel records almost always remained. Old newspapers, aerial photographs, declassified military files, or consistent testimonies eventually reconstructed part of the story. The case of that village was different. It was as if someone had tried to eliminate every possible trace. As the investigation progressed, researchers began cross-referencing maps produced by different countries. The logic was simple. If one nation had altered its records, perhaps another maintained the original version. For weeks, nothing came up, until a foreign map, published a few years before the alleged disappearance, revealed the exact same village at the same geographical point indicated by the first documents found. There was even a small note about a secondary road connecting the settlement to a larger city. Curiously, in subsequent editions of that same atlas, the road remained, but the village simply ceased to exist. There was no sign of ruins, nor any indication of a name change, just an empty space. From that moment on, the investigation stopped being purely historical and began to involve remote sensing specialists. Using modern satellite imagery, they tried to identify any pattern that might indicate old structures hidden beneath the vegetation. At certain points, straight lines improbable for a natural formation emerged. Small rectangles appeared below the soil, suggesting old foundations. Nothing conclusive, but enough to justify an expedition to the site. When the team finally reached the region indicated by the old maps, they found only a silent forest. Tall trees covered practically the entire landscape. The sound of the wind pushing through the canopy was broken only by the distant call of a few birds. At first glance, nothing indicated that people had once lived there. However, just a few meters after leaving the main trail, curious clues began to appear. A row of stones aligned almost perfectly, remnants of bricks hidden under thick roots, fragments of heavy glass partially buried, objects far too common to be there by chance. Each new discovery raised more questions than answers. None of the structures were preserved enough to indicate their original function. Still, the arrangement of the stones suggested streets. Some concrete blocks seemed to have belonged to house foundations. A well completely overrun by vegetation was found near what looked like a small square. Everything was severely degraded and consistent with a human settlement abandoned many decades ago. While part of the team documented the site, another researcher decided to talk to residents of neighboring towns again. This time, instead of asking directly about the missing village, he showed only an old photograph of the church found in the family collection. The reaction of one elderly man caught his attention. He stared at the image for a few seconds before saying something unexpected. "My grandfather used to talk about that tower, but he said we should never go looking for that place." Asked why, he simply replied that nobody liked to touch on the subject. According to the stories he heard as a child, some people left to work in that region and never returned. Others claimed the village was evacuated in a matter of days. There were also those who swore it never actually existed. The accounts were so different, they seemed to belong to entirely separate stories. This kind of contradiction is common with past events. Collective memory tends to fill in gaps with interpretations, legends, and exaggerations. However, the more reports were gathered, the more a pattern began to emerge. Almost all of them mentioned extremely rapid change. Not a gradual abandonment over years, but a disappearance concentrated in a short window of time. Some remembered trucks circulating through the region for several consecutive nights. Others spoke of military personnel seen on the roads. None of these accounts could be confirmed. Still, the coincidence was hard to ignore. Back at the archives, another discovery altered the course of the investigation once again. An old real estate record indicated the sale of dozens of properties located precisely in that area, all acquired by a single entity within less than 6 months. The buyer was neither a private individual nor a known company. It was just an acronym accompanied by an administrative address that years later ceased to exist. The attempt to trace that institution led to a dead end. No document explained its purpose. No record detailed its activities. It was as if it had disappeared too. At that point, several theories began to surface. Some argued that the region hid mineral resources considered strategic during a specific historical period. Others believed the village had been removed for sanitary reasons following a severe outbreak of a disease. There were also hypotheses involving military projects, industrial accidents, and even secret research programs. All seemed plausible at first glance. None, however, could explain why it was necessary to erase the city's name from maps and eliminate virtually all administrative records related to it. Then a final clue emerged. Small, almost insignificant, but capable of completely shifting the investigation's perspective. In a recently digitized photographic archive, an aerial image taken decades ago during a geological survey surfaced. The photograph clearly showed the area where the village should have been, and carefully zooming in, it was possible to distinguish the grid of streets, a few buildings, and something that looked like a central square. The city really existed. The doubt was no longer if it existed. Now the question was far more disturbing. Who decided it should be forgotten?